Nestled in the emerald waters of the Pacific, an archipelago of ancient forests and neon-lit skylines, stretching from the icy shores of Hokkaido to the subtropical beaches of Okinawa, modern Japan is a living contradiction. It is a realm where bullet trains race past centuries-old temples, a culture defined by both profound politeness and fierce creative energy. A society that honors the silent ritual of the tea ceremony while inventing the future of robotics. Historically, however, Japan is a story of spectacular reinvention. Its people have weathered the firestorms of civil war, the pressure of closed borders, and the ashes of atomic destruction, only to rise again each time with renewed purpose. Their identity, a unique tapestry woven from borrowed ideas and fierce native traditions, was forged in the crucible of emperors and shoguns. The saga of how this resilient nation turned every challenge into a global triumph is an epic of ice, iron, and an indomitable spirit. This is the history of Japan. Before we unroll this epic tapestry, hit that subscribe button to join us for more deep dives into the world's greatest civilizations. And when you're done, drop a comment below telling us which era of Japan's past fascinates you the most. More than 10,000 years before the first skyscraper touched the Tokyo skyline, an extraordinary age began on the lush islands that would one day become Japan. This was the Jomon era, the true starting point of the archipelago's long and winding story, when bands of hunter-gatherers roamed the dense forests, fished the rich coastal waters, and produced some of the oldest pottery known to human civilization. These ancient inhabitants were not merely skilled artisans, they were genuine innovators who left a permanent imprint on Japan's cultural soul. Recent archaeological discoveries have illuminated their sophisticated ceramic methods in stunning detail. They created elaborate decorations by pressing twisted cords into moist clay, shaping vessels that were both functional for cooking and storage and artistically striking in their patterns. This pottery was far from ordinary. It revealed the Jomon people's deep spiritual bond with the natural world around them, a connection that would echo through Japanese aesthetics for millennia. The Jomon were also masters of survival in a challenging environment. They maintained a varied diet that included hunting deer and wild boar, fishing for salmon and tuna along the coasts, and foraging for nuts, berries, and edible roots. This diverse food supply allowed their communities to endure for thousands of years without the need for intensive agriculture. They shifted their eating habits with the changing seasons, cleverly using a wide range of natural resources from acorns and chestnuts to shellfish and seaweed. This remarkable adaptability was the key to their astonishing longevity, as they flourished across every major environment of the Japanese islands, from the snowy northern reaches of Hokkaido to the subtropical southern beaches of Kyushu. Interestingly, the Jomon people were neither fully nomadic nor completely settled. Instead, they adopted a semi-sedentary lifestyle that combined the best of both worlds. They built pit houses with thatched roofs, returning to the same village sites year after year, yet they also moved seasonally to follow food sources. This flexibility enabled them to thrive for over 10 millennia, an almost unimaginable span of cultural continuity. Beyond mere survival, they nurtured a rich spiritual life. They created clay dog figurines, often shaped like pregnant women or mysterious anthropomorphic forms that likely played roles in fertility rites, healing ceremonies, or ancestor veneration. Some figurines have been found deliberately broken, suggesting ritual destruction. These enigmatic artifacts add deep layers of meaning to our understanding of Jomon belief systems. Recent archaeological findings have overturned older assumptions that the Jomon were simple, isolated tribes. Evidence now points to complex social organizations, with leaders who oversaw communal projects and trade networks that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Different regional styles of pottery and tools indicate that the Jomon exchanged goods and ideas across the archipelago. They were far more advanced than the old label of primitive hunter-gatherers suggests. They were builders of an intricate society that lasted longer than many great empires. Around 300 BCE, a fresh chapter unfolded with the arrival of the Yayoi period, which brought dramatic transformations. The Yayoi people, migrating from the Asian continent, introduced wet rice cultivation, a revolutionary technology that would define Japanese agriculture for the next 2,000 years. Rice paddies allowed for much larger, more permanent settlements because rice could be stored as a surplus, supporting population growth and specialization. The Yayoi also brought metal tools, first bronze, then iron, which dramatically improved farming efficiency, weaponry, and the quality of crafted goods. Iron plowshares turned tough soil, and bronze bells called dotaku were used in rituals, showing a new level of artistic and technological sophistication. The Yayoi period also witnessed the emergence of a more layered hierarchical society. As successful rice farming generated surpluses and wealth, clear distinctions emerged between elite leaders who controlled land and water, warriors who enforced their will, and common farmers who worked the paddies. This laid the essential groundwork for the development of early political systems, including small kingdoms that began to vie for power. Trade with neighboring regions such as Korea and China flourished, bringing new technologies, ideas, and cultural influences. The influx of foreign concepts, from bronze mirrors to advanced burial practices, contributed to rapid societal changes, setting the stage for the next great leap forward. Then, during the 4th century CE, the Yamato clan rose as a formidable power in the Kinai region near modern Nara. Their ascent marked the beginnings of Japan's first genuine centralized state, a major departure from the fragmented clan-based society that had existed for centuries. The Yamato rulers were masterful propagandists. They claimed direct descent from Amaterasu, the sun goddess of Japanese mythology, effectively fusing their political authority with religious significance. This assertion of divine lineage was not just for prestige. It served as a powerful tool to consolidate power and expand influence across the islands through strategic marriages, military conquests, and alliances with local chieftains. As the Yamato's power grew, so did their interactions with the advanced civilizations of Korea and China. From the Korean kingdom of Baekje, they received Buddhist scriptures and artisans. From China, they adopted Confucian ideals of hierarchy, written characters, and sophisticated legal codes. Buddhism, arriving via Korea in the mid-6th century, quickly gained favor among the elite, offering a rich cosmology that complemented existing Shinto beliefs. The Yamato court also developed its own administrative structures, including a system of ministers and provincial governors, creating a more cohesive national identity. By the 7th century, the foundations were laid for Japan's long imperial tradition, with the emperor ruling by divine right, a concept that would persist for over a millennium, shaping Japan's political and cultural destiny in profound ways. As the Yamato state solidified its grip, a new era dawned that would redefine the very essence of Japanese governance. The Nara period, spanning from 710 to 794 CE, marked a decisive turning point. At its heart was the establishment of a brand new capital, Heijo-kyo, the city we now call Nara, meticulously modeled after Chang'an, the magnificent capital of China's Tang dynasty. This was not merely a change of address. It was a bold statement of Japan's growing ambitions and its willingness to learn from the most powerful empire of the time. The city was laid out on a strict grid pattern, with grand boulevards, official buildings, and massive temples that announced to all visitors that Japan was now a civilized, centralized state. Nara quickly became the vibrant hub of political and cultural innovation. The central government, eager to solidify its authority, implemented legal codes inspired by the Chinese Confucian system, most famously the Taiho Code of 702 CE. These codes were not just rules on paper, they reshaped Japanese society, establishing a clear hierarchy of ranks and defining the roles and responsibilities of every citizen, from the emperor down to the lowest common farmer. The system created a bureaucracy based on merit and examinations, though in practice, noble birth still mattered enormously. Buddhism, which had been introduced earlier, now exploded in popularity under official imperial patronage. The construction of monumental temples like Todai-ji was not just an act of faith, it was a clear statement of the empire's power and wealth. The massive bronze Buddha statue housed within, towering over 15 meters high, required most of Japan's copper production for years to complete. These structures served as tangible symbols of both spiritual and political authority, drawing pilgrims and awe-struck visitors from across the land. But the Nara rulers were not content with merely borrowing from others. They also sought to create a uniquely Japanese identity. This led to the compilation of Japan's earliest historical texts, the Kojiki, record of ancient matters, in 712, and the Nihon Shoki, Chronicles of Japan, in 720. These were not dry historical records. They were carefully crafted narratives that legitimized imperial rule by tracing the emperor's lineage directly back to the sun goddess Amaterasu. They mixed myth, legend, and fact to create a powerful origin story that would shape Japanese self-understanding for centuries. The Nara period also saw significant changes in land management. The Ritsuryo system centralized land ownership under the emperor's control, theoretically redistributing rice fields to every peasant household in exchange for taxes and labor. This was not just about property rights. It was a clever way to reinforce imperial governance by tying people's economic survival directly to the state. Cultural and intellectual exchanges with Tang China continued to enrich Japan, with embassies sent regularly to absorb the latest in poetry, calligraphy, painting, medicine, and astronomy. In 794 CE, the imperial capital moved again, this time to Heian-kyo, known today as Kyoto. This was not just a change of scenery, it signaled the beginning of the Heian period, an era that would last nearly 400 years and leave an indelible mark on Japanese aesthetics, literature, and religion. The new capital was even grander than Nara, designed with a central north-south avenue and a layout that mirrored Chinese ideals while incorporating Japanese sensibilities. As the new capital took shape, so did a new power structure. The Fujiwara clan emerged as the real force behind the throne. They were master politicians, using strategic marriages to weave their DNA into the very fabric of the imperial family. Fujiwara daughters became empresses, and Fujiwara men served as regents to child emperors, sometimes as Sessho, regent for a young emperor, and sometimes as Kampaku, regent for an adult emperor. Over time, the emperor in Kyoto became a revered but powerless figurehead, while the Fujiwara pulled the levers of power from their lavish estates. This era saw an explosion of cultural achievements, largely because the elite had the leisure and resources to pursue art and literature. The development of kana, a simplified, uniquely Japanese phonetic writing system, allowed for a flowering of native literature that was no longer dependent on difficult Chinese characters. The tale of Genji, often considered the world's first true novel, was written during this time by a court lady named Murasaki Shikibu. It painted a vivid, intimate portrait of Heian court life, full of intrigue, romance, poetry contests, and the melancholy beauty of fleeting moments. Another masterpiece, The Pillow Book by Sei Shonagon, offered witty, sharp observations of court life and helped define the aesthetic ideal of mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of the transience of things. Religion also underwent significant changes. Buddhism and Shinto, once separate belief systems, began to intertwine in a process called Shinbutsu Shugo. Kami, Shinto spirits, were considered manifestations of Buddhist deities, and temples and shrines were often built side by side. This syncretism gave birth to new forms of art, architecture, and ritual that were uniquely Japanese. Despite these cultural advancements, cracks were forming in centralized authority. The Fujiwara's grip on power began to weaken as they focused more on courtly intrigues than on effective provincial governance. Provincial landowners, known as daimyo, started to gain more autonomy, building up their own private armed forces and ignoring imperial edicts from distant Kyoto. The rise of private tax-exempt landholdings called shuan further eroded the government's revenue. These estates, often owned by nobles or temples, were like small independent kingdoms. As the Shun system expanded, it laid the economic and military groundwork for a feudal society that would dominate Japan for centuries. By the late Heian period, powerful military clans like the Minamoto and Taira were gaining prominence. These warrior families, skilled in the art of war and bound by new codes of loyalty, saw opportunities in the weakening central authority. They began to challenge the Fujiwara's dominance, setting the stage for a bloody showdown that would end the imperial dream and give birth to the samurai age. The elegant decline of the Heian court set the stage for one of Japan's most pivotal conflicts. The Genpei War, fought between 1180 and 1185 CE, pitted two powerful samurai clans against each other in a brutal struggle that would rewrite Japan's entire political map. On one side stood the Taira clan, also known as the Heiki, who had risen to prominence in the imperial court through their military might and strategic marriages. On the other, the Minamoto clan, also known as the Genji, fierce warriors from the eastern provinces, determined to seize power for themselves. This was not just another power struggle among nobles, it was a bloody birth. This conflict would give rise to a new warrior class and fundamentally change Japanese society forever. The war began over a dispute about imperial succession. The Taira, led by the ambitious and ruthless Taira no Kiyomori, had managed to place their chosen candidate on the chrysanthemum throne and had even married their daughter to the emperor. They controlled Kyoto and seemed invincible. But the Minamoto, led by the cunning and patient Minamoto no Yoritomo, felt threatened and sidelined. When a retired emperor issued a call to arms against the Taira, the Minamoto rallied their forces in open rebellion. What followed were 5 years of intense shifting warfare that spread across the length of Japan. Cities burned, alliances were made and broken by the hour, and tens of thousands of samurai and civilians lost their lives as the two clans battled for ultimate supremacy. At first, the Taira seemed unbeatable. They had the emperor in their pocket, controlled the capital, and possessed a powerful navy. But the Minamoto had something the Taira lacked: a fanatical fighting spirit and brilliant tactical leaders, including Yoritomo's younger brothers, the legendary warrior Minamoto no Yoshitsune and the stern strategist Minamoto no Noriyori. The tide of war turned decisively in 1185 with the Battle of Dan-no-Ura, a savage naval clash in the Shimonoseki Strait. The Taira fleet, despite its numerical advantage, was outmaneuvered by Yoshitsune's aggressive tactics. The battle was notable not just for its bloody outcome, with the Taira and the young Emperor Antoku drowning in the waters, but for the rise of samurai naval warfare. It showcased the growing martial prowess of the warrior class, who were evolving from simple provincial guards into skilled tacticians, strategists, and national leaders. With their victory, Minamoto no Yoritomo became the most powerful man in Japan. In 1192, the emperor, with little choice, appointed Yoritomo as shogun, a military dictator. This established the Kamakura shogunate, named after the coastal city where Yoritomo set up his headquarters. This marked a seismic shift in Japanese governance. Real power now rested not with the silk-robed aristocrats of Kyoto, but with a military government led by a general in the distant east. The emperor remained in Kyoto as a sacred ceremonial figure, preserving the ancient illusion of imperial authority, but all real political, economic, and military power rested with the shogun. The Genpei War transformed Japanese society more profoundly than any event before it. The samurai emerged as a distinct and powerful social class, replacing the old court nobility as the ruling elite. They developed their own code of ethics, emphasizing unwavering loyalty to one's lord, personal discipline, frugality, and valor in battle. This warrior ethos, later formalized as Bushido, the way of the warrior, would shape Japanese culture, philosophy, and aesthetics for centuries to come. The war also became the subject of numerous epic tales and poems, most famously the Tale of the Heike, which romanticized the samurai lifestyle, celebrated their heroic deeds, and mourned the tragic fate of the Taira. These stories helped solidify the samurai's heroic place in the Japanese imagination and established a template for warrior values that influenced everything from family loyalties to business practices. Under the Kamakura shogunate, the samurai code continued to take shape. To solidify their authority, the shogunate implemented new land management systems. Loyal samurai vassals were rewarded with confiscated estates, creating a vast network of warriors personally indebted to the shogun. This system, known as Jito, steward appointments, strengthened the shogun's control over the provinces and ensured a reliable, motivated military force. The shogunate also created a dual structure of governance. The imperial court in Kyoto handled ceremonial and religious matters, while the shogunate in Kamakura managed law, defense, and taxation. It was an awkward but workable arrangement that lasted for over a century. Then, in the late 13th century, Japan faced its greatest external threat before the modern era: the Mongol invasions. Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, and the Mongol Emperor of China had already conquered Korea and set his sights on Japan. In 1274, a massive fleet of some 900 ships carrying around 40,000 Mongol, Chinese, and Korean troops landed on the coast of Kyushu. The samurai fought fiercely, but they were completely unprepared for Mongol tactics. Coordinated infantry charges, thunderous drums, poisoned arrows, and explosive bombs. The Mongols used fire arrows and siege weapons that the Japanese had never seen. Despite their courage, the samurai suffered heavy losses, but then a sudden violent storm swept in, wrecking much of the Mongol fleet and forcing them to retreat. The Japanese called this storm a kamikaze, a divine wind. Kublai Khan was not deterred. He spent 7 years building an even larger invasion force. In 1281, he returned with an armada of 4,400 ships and over 140,000 men, the largest seaborne invasion in history until D-Day in World War II. The Japanese had learned from their previous encounter. They had built a long stone wall along the coast of Kyushu and positioned their best warriors behind it. The Mongols landed but could not break through the defenses. For weeks, the two sides fought a grinding war of attrition. Then again, a massive typhoon struck. This second kamikaze was even more devastating, destroying thousands of ships and drowning tens of thousands of soldiers. The Japanese saw this as undeniable divine intervention, proof that their gods protected Japan. The myth of the divine land was born. However, the Mongol invasions, though unsuccessful, strained the Kamakura shogunate's resources to the breaking point. The shogunate had to maintain expensive coastal defenses and reward the countless samurai who had fought. But there were no new lands to give away as rewards, because the invasion had been repelled, not conquered. This financial pressure created deep unrest among the warrior class, many of whom felt their efforts were not adequately compensated. The shogunate also faced internal conflicts between the Hojo family, who had come to dominate the shogunate as regents, and disgruntled vassals. By the early 14th century, cracks were appearing everywhere. Regional warlords began to assert more independence, challenging the centralized authority of Kamakura. In 1333, a coalition of discontented samurai and court nobles, led by Emperor Go-Daigo, successfully overthrew the Kamakura shogunate, bringing a dramatic end to this era. As the Kamakura shogunate crumbled, Japan stood at a familiar crossroads. Who would rule next? The next dynasty, the Ashikaga shogunate, would face a seemingly impossible challenge: how to maintain order in a land of increasingly powerful, autonomous warlords. Their answer would set the stage for centuries of both breathtaking creativity and devastating civil war. The Ashikaga came to power in 1336 when Ashikaga Takauji, a brilliant but ambitious general, betrayed Emperor Go-Daigo and established a new military government. Takauji set up his capital in the Muromachi district of Kyoto, giving this era its alternative name, the Muromachi period. Unlike the Kamakura shogunate, which had ruled from a safe distance, the Ashikaga chose to embed themselves right next to the imperial court. This move was meant to strengthen their authority over the emperor, but it ultimately led to increased political intrigue, backstabbing, and power struggles within the capital itself. From the very start, the Ashikaga shoguns faced immense difficulties in maintaining centralized control. The regional warlords, the daimyo, had grown incredibly powerful during the late Kamakura period. They had their own armies, their own castles, and their own sources of revenue from the Shun estates. Many acted as independent kings in their own domains, ignoring the shogun's orders and pursuing their own rivalries. The Ashikaga shoguns found themselves constantly negotiating, bribing, and sometimes fighting just to keep these regional powers in check. For a few decades, they managed a fragile balance. Despite the intense political instability, the Muromachi period saw a remarkable flowering of Japanese culture. The Ashikaga shoguns were great patrons of the arts, and their rule coincided with the rise of Zen Buddhism's influence on Japanese aesthetics. Zen monasteries became centers of learning, painting, calligraphy, and poetry. The tea ceremony, which had originated as a simple monastic ritual to keep monks awake during meditation, evolved into a highly stylized meditative art form embodying Zen principles of simplicity, mindfulness, and the beauty of imperfection. The chashitsu, tea house, became a retreat from the chaos of civil war. No theater, with its slow, graceful movements and haunting masks, developed under the patronage of the shogunate. Flower arranging, ikebana, and rock gardens, karisansui, also flourished as Zen-influenced arts. The most famous architectural monument of the era is Kinkaku-ji, the Golden Pavilion, built by Shogun Ashikaga Yoshimitsu in the late 1300s. This stunning building, with its top two floors entirely covered in gold leaf, perfectly blended Japanese and Chinese architectural styles and became a symbol of cultural achievement, even as war raged outside its gardens. However, this cultural renaissance stood in stark contrast to the political realities. The Ashikaga shogunate's grip on power weakened with each generation. The shoguns increasingly relied on powerful daimyo to enforce their will, which only made those daimyo stronger. The decline came to a head with the outbreak of the Onin War in 1467. What started as a seemingly minor dispute over who would be the next shogun, or more accurately, who would serve as regent to the shogun, quickly spiraled into a decade-long civil war that engulfed Kyoto and spread across the entire country. Two great warlords, Yamana Sozen and Hosokawa Katsumoto, mobilized their allies and turned the capital into a battlefield. For 10 years, Kyoto burned. Temples, palaces, and homes were destroyed. Hundreds of thousands died. And when the war finally ended in 1477, no one had won. Kyoto lay in ruins, the shogun's authority had evaporated, and the daimyo returned to their provinces knowing they answered to no one. The Onin War marked a definitive turning point. It shattered any remaining illusion of centralized authority and ushered in the Sengoku period, the Warring States period. During this chaotic era, Japan fractured into dozens of small, fiercely independent domains, each controlled by a daimyo who recognized no higher power. These warlords fought constantly, forming and breaking alliances in a ruthless, zero-sum quest for supremacy. The shogun in Kyoto still held his title, but he had virtually no real power, no money, and no army. Across Japan, samurai clans rose and fell with dizzying speed. Ambitious leaders like Hojo Saun in the Kanto region, Mori Motonari in the west, and Date Masamune in the north carved out large domains through a combination of military genius, treachery, and luck. The term Gekkokujo, the low oppressing the high, became the motto of the age, as low-ranking samurai overthrew their lords and even peasants could rise to positions of power. The Sengoku period also saw significant innovations in military technology and strategy. Castles evolved from simple wooden fortifications to massive stone and wood complexes with intricate moats, walls and gates designed to withstand long sieges. The introduction of firearms from Europe in 1543, when Portuguese traders landed on Tanegashima Island, changed the nature of warfare overnight. The matchlock gun, or Tanegashima, allowed peasant foot soldiers to kill even the most highly trained samurai with a single shot. Warlords who adopted firearms early gained a huge advantage. The period also saw the rise of peasant uprisings, called Ikki, often led by religious sects like the true Pure Land Buddhists. These Ikki armies, composed of farmers and monks, sometimes fielded tens of thousands of fighters and held off entire daimyo armies. It was an age of chaos, but also of opportunity. And from this chaos, three extraordinary men would emerge, each a ruthless genius who would drag Japan kicking and screaming toward unity. Before any single man could dream of unifying Japan, the country first had to be completely broken, and it was, into a patchwork of warring states. Then, in the mid-16th century, three extraordinary leaders appeared in rapid succession, each building on the work of the last, to forge a unified nation from the ashes of a century of war. Oda Nobunaga was the first. Born in 1534 into a minor daimyo family in Owari Province, modern Aichi Prefecture, he was considered eccentric, even wild as a youth. But behind his unconventional behavior was a brilliant, ruthless, and innovative mind. In 1560, he faced the powerful Imagawa Yoshimoto, who was marching on Kyoto with an army of 25,000. Nobunaga had only 2,000 men. Everyone expected him to be crushed, but Nobunaga launched a daring surprise attack during a thunderstorm, catching the Imagawa camp completely off guard. He killed Imagawa Yoshimoto and shattered his army. The Battle of Okehazama made Nobunaga's reputation. From then on, he was a force to be reckoned with. Nobunaga was not a traditional samurai. He despised the old courtly ways. He embraced meritocracy, promoting talented men regardless of birth. He was also the first major warlord to fully exploit firearms. In 1575, at the Battle of Nagashino, he faced the legendary Takeda cavalry, considered the finest in Japan. Nobunaga deployed 3 ranks of matchlock gunners behind wooden palisades. The ranks fired in rotation, one rank shooting while the others reloaded, creating a continuous hail of lead. The Takeda cavalry charged again and again, and again they were mowed down. By the end of the day, the Takeda clan was destroyed as a fighting force. Nagashino revolutionized Japanese warfare. The age of the mounted samurai charging with bow and sword was over. The age of massed infantry with firearms had begun. Nobunaga was also brutally efficient at eliminating his enemies. He understood that to unify Japan, he had to destroy the old power structures. In 1571, he attacked the temple complex of Mount Hiei, the center of militant Buddhism. His army surrounded the mountain and burned everything, killing thousands of monks and civilians. The destruction of Mount Hiei sent a chilling message. Nobunaga would tolerate no opposition, not even from the gods. By 1582, Nobunaga had conquered central Japan and was poised to complete the unification. But then one of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, betrayed him. Surrounded in a Kyoto temple called Honnoji, Nobunaga committed ritual suicide, seppuku. He was 48 years old. His dying words were said to be, "The world is not worth worrying about." The second unifier, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, was one of history's most remarkable rise stories. Born in 1537 to a peasant family in Owari, he had no surname, no status, and no education. He enlisted in Nobunaga's army as a sandal bearer, but his intelligence, charm, and relentless energy caught Nobunaga's eye. He rose through the ranks to become one of Nobunaga's top generals. When Nobunaga died, Hideyoshi was in the west, fighting the Mori clan. He rushed back, avenged his master by defeating Akechi Mitsuhide at the Battle of Yamazaki, and then positioned himself as Nobunaga's successor. Over the next 8 years, Hideyoshi completed the military unification of Japan. He conquered the remaining independent daimyo through a combination of overwhelming force and generous diplomacy. By 1590, with the fall of the Hojo clan at Odawara, Japan was unified under a single ruler for the first time in over a century. Now, as the undisputed master of Japan, the emperor appointed him Kampaku, imperial regent. Hideyoshi implemented sweeping policies to prevent future wars. His most famous was the sword hunt of 1588. He ordered all peasants to surrender their swords, spears, guns, and bows. The official reason was to collect metal for a giant Buddha statue, but the real purpose was to permanently disarm the peasantry and ensure that only samurai could use force. He also froze Japan's class structure, forbidding anyone from changing their social status. Samurai were forced to live in castle towns, separated from farmers, and he conducted land surveys to calculate exactly how much rice each province produced, thereby fixing tax revenues and preventing daimyo from hiding wealth. But having unified Japan, Hideyoshi developed grandiose dreams. He wanted to conquer China. To do that, he needed to go through Korea. In 1592, he launched a massive invasion of Korea with over 150,000 soldiers. The invasion was initially successful. The Japanese captured Seoul and Pyongyang, but Korean Admiral Yi Sun-sin, a naval genius, destroyed Japan's supply fleets using innovative turtle ships, armored warships with spikes. Chinese Ming forces came to Korea's aid. The war bogged down into a brutal stalemate. A second invasion in 1597 also failed. When Hideyoshi died in 1598, the Japanese forces withdrew in disgrace. The Korean campaigns had drained Japan's treasury and weakened the unity Hideyoshi had built. The third unifier, Tokugawa Ieyasu, was the patient one. Born in 1543 into a minor daimyo family, he had survived a childhood as a hostage and served both Nobunaga and Hideyoshi loyally. He never sought the spotlight, but he built his power base in the rich Kanto region around Edo, modern Tokyo. When Hideyoshi died, leaving a 5-year-old son, Hideyori, a power struggle erupted. Ieyasu outmaneuvered his rivals and in 1600 crushed them at the epic Battle of Sekigahara. The battle lasted only a few hours, but it decided the fate of Japan for the next 250 years. In 1603, the emperor appointed Ieyasu as shogun, officially beginning the Tokugawa shogunate. He then set about consolidating his victory, redistributing lands to loyal allies, and creating a system that would keep the peace for centuries. The Tokugawa shogunate, based in Edo, modern Tokyo, created a system of government that was both ruthless and remarkably stable. At the top was the shogun, who held ultimate military and political authority. Below him were around 250 daimyo, divided into three categories: shinpan, relatives of the Tokugawa; fudai, hereditary allies who had served the Tokugawa before Sekigahara; and tozama, outside lords who had submitted after the battle. The tozama were kept at a distance, excluded from central power, but allowed to rule their domains as long as they did not cause trouble. To keep all daimyo in check, the shogunate implemented the sankin-kotai system, alternate attendance. Every daimyo had to maintain a residence in Edo and spend every other year there. When they returned to their domain, they had to leave their families behind as hostages. The cost of maintaining two lavish households and traveling with a large retinue drained daimyo finances, preventing them from amassing enough wealth to challenge the shogunate. The Tokugawa also implemented a strict social hierarchy known as shi no ko sho, samurai at the top, followed by farmers, artisans and merchants at the bottom. Samurai were forbidden from engaging in trade or farming. They lived on rice stipends and devoted themselves to martial arts, administration or scholarship. Farmers, despite being second in theory, were heavily taxed and often lived in poverty. Merchants, officially at the bottom, grew increasingly wealthy through commerce, a source of tension. The shogunate also enforced sakoku, closed country. From the 1630s onward, Japanese were forbidden to travel abroad, and foreigners were forbidden to enter, except for Dutch and Chinese traders confined to a small artificial island in Nagasaki harbor. Christianity was brutally suppressed after the Shimabara Rebellion of 1637-38, and Japanese converts were executed or forced to recant. For over 250 years, Japan lived in near-total isolation from the outside world. This Pax Tokugawa peace brought unprecedented stability. The constant warfare of the Sengoku period ended, cities grew, trade flourished, literacy spread, especially among the growing merchant class. A vibrant urban culture emerged in Edo, Osaka and Kyoto. Kabuki theater, with its flamboyant costumes and dramatic stories, entertained the masses. Ukiyo-e woodblock prints depicted beautiful courtesans, sumo wrestlers and famous actors. Haiku poetry, perfected by Matsuo Basho, captured fleeting moments of beauty in 17 syllables. The arts of tea ceremony, flower arranging, and calligraphy were codified and spread beyond the warrior class. For the first time in Japanese history, a widespread commoner culture emerged. Yet the seeds of the shogunate's destruction were also sown during this long peace. The samurai, with nothing to fight, turned into administrators. Many became poor, their rice stipends fixed while prices rose. The merchant class grew wealthy but remained officially scorned, leading to resentment and occasional reforms that only angered both sides. More dangerously, rangaku, Dutch learning, the study of Western medicine, astronomy and military science through the Dutch at Nagasaki, planted ideas about a world far more advanced than Japan. By the early 19th century, Russian, British and American ships began appearing off Japan's shores, demanding trade. The shogunate turned them away, but it was clear to many that the isolation could not last forever. The end came in 1853, when Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States Navy sailed into Edo Bay with 4 steam-powered black ships bristling with cannons. Perry delivered a letter from President Millard Fillmore demanding that Japan open its ports. He promised to return the next year for an answer. The shogunate was thrown into a panic. When Perry returned in 1854 with an even larger fleet, the shogunate capitulated, signing the Treaty of Kanagawa. This treaty opened 2 ports to American ships and allowed a U.S. consul to reside in Japan. Other Western powers, Britain, Russia, the Netherlands, quickly demanded similar treaties. These unequal treaties gave Westerners extraterritorial rights and fixed low tariffs, humiliating Japan. The Tokugawa shogunate had shown weakness, and its enemies smelled blood. The arrival of Perry's black ships sparked a furious debate within Japan. Some wanted to continue isolation, but they had no answer to Western cannons. Others, especially in the powerful Western domains of Satsuma, Choshu, Tosa, and Hizen, argued that Japan must learn from the West to resist the West. Rich country, strong military. These reformers rallied around the young Emperor Meiji, who ascended the throne in 1867. The slogan Sono Joy, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, masked a more practical goal: overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate and create a new centralized state. In 1868, the Boshin War erupted. The shogunate's forces, outdated and demoralized, were defeated by the better-equipped armies of Satsuma and Chosho. The last shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, surrendered and was allowed to retire in peace. The emperor, just 15 years old, was moved from Kyoto to the shogun's former palace in Edo, which was renamed Tokyo, eastern capital. The Meiji Restoration had begun. What followed was one of the most rapid and deliberate transformations in world history. The Meiji oligarchs, mostly young samurai from Satsuma, Chosho, and Tosa, knew they had to modernize or be colonized. They sent missions abroad to study Western governments, economies, and militaries. They abolished the daimyo domains and replaced them with prefectures, centralizing power. They disbanded the samurai class, eliminating their hereditary stipends and forbidding them from wearing swords in public. The samurai, once the ruling elite, were offered government jobs, business opportunities, or pensions, but many were left bitter and impoverished. Some rebelled, most famously Saigo Takamori, whose 1877 Satsuma rebellion was crushed by a conscript army of commoners armed with rifles. The Meiji government also enacted land reform, establishing private property rights and a unified land tax based on cash rather than rice. They built railroads, telegraph lines, and modern ports. They established a universal education system that taught science, mathematics, and loyalty to the emperor. They created a modern conscript army modeled on Prussia and a British-style navy. In 1889, they promulgated the Meiji Constitution, which created a parliament, the Diet, but reserved real power for the emperor and his appointed ministers. It was a hybrid system, Western in form, but authoritarian in practice. Japan's rapid modernization was soon tested. In 1894, Japan went to war with China over influence in Korea. The First Sino-Japanese War was a shock to the world. Japan's modern navy and army crushed China's outdated forces in just 8 months. The 1895 Treaty of Shimonoseki gave Japan Taiwan and the Liaodong Peninsula, though Russia, Germany, and France forced Japan to return the latter. More importantly, it established Japan as the dominant power in East Asia. Then, in 1904, Japan attacked Russia over control of Manchuria and Korea. The Russo-Japanese War was even more stunning. Japan defeated a major European power. The Battle of Tsushima Strait in 1905 saw Admiral Togo Heihachiro annihilate the Russian Baltic Fleet. President Theodore Roosevelt mediated the peace treaty, and for the first time, a non-Western nation was treated as an equal by the great powers. Japan annexed Korea outright in 1910. During World War I, Japan joined the Allies and seized German possessions in China and the Pacific. The war brought an economic boom, but the 1920s brought economic depression, labor unrest, and political assassinations. The Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 devastated Tokyo and Yokohama, killing over 100,000 people. Militarism and nationalism surged. By the 1930s, the military had effectively taken control of the government. In 1931, army officers staged a false flag incident in Manchuria and invaded, establishing the puppet state of Manchukuo. In 1937, a skirmish near Beijing escalated into full-scale war with China, a brutal conflict that would kill millions. Japan, desperate for oil and rubber, looked south toward European colonies in Southeast Asia. In 1940, Japan allied with Germany and Italy. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the US Pacific Fleet. The Pacific War had begun. For the first 6 months of the war, Japan was unstoppable. They seized Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, Indonesia, and Burma. Japanese soldiers seemed invincible, and the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, a propaganda term for Japan's empire, expanded to its greatest extent. But the tide turned at the Battle of Midway in June 1942, where the US Navy sank 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. Japan had lost its offensive power. From then on, the Allies' island hopped across the Pacific, grinding down Japanese forces in bloody battles like Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. The Japanese fought with suicidal ferocity, using kamikaze suicide pilots and refusing to surrender, but they could not stop the advance. By 1945, Japan was starving. American B-29 bombers firebombed Tokyo, killing over 100,000 civilians in a single night. The bombing devastated 60 other cities. Then, on August 6, 1945, an American B-29 named Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, instantly killing 80,000 people. 3 days later, another bomb fell on Nagasaki, killing 40,000. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito, in a radio broadcast never before heard by his subjects, announced Japan's surrender. The war was over. Japan was occupied for the first time in its history. The American occupation, led by General Douglas MacArthur, was remarkably constructive. MacArthur's team wrote a new constitution that renounced war, Article 9, established a parliamentary democracy, guaranteed human rights, and granted women the right to vote. The emperor was stripped of his divinity and became a symbolic figurehead. Land reforms broke up large estates and gave tenant farmers their own land. Labor unions were legalized. The military was disbanded. Japan was forbidden from rearming. From the ruins of 1945, Japan rose again with astonishing speed. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, turned Japan into a supply base for UN forces, bringing an economic boom. The government, through the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI, guided industrial policy, promoting steel, shipbuilding, automobiles, and electronics. Japanese companies adopted American quality control methods and added their own innovations like Kaizen, continuous improvement. By the 1960s, Japan was growing at double-digit rates. The 1964 Tokyo Olympics showcased the new Japan. The Shinkansen bullet train, running at speeds over 200 kilometers per hour, symbolized a nation reborn as a technological leader. The Japanese economic miracle of the 1950s to 1980s transformed Japan into the world's second-largest economy. Companies like Toyota, Honda, Sony, and Panasonic became global icons. Japanese cars and electronics set new standards for quality and reliability. Japan even challenged American dominance in semiconductors. By the late 1980s, Japanese real estate was so inflated that the Imperial Palace grounds were worth more than all of California. Then, in 1990, the bubble burst. The stock market crashed, real estate plunged. Japan entered the lost decade of the 1990s, actually 2 lost decades, of stagnation, deflation, and banking crises. From the frozen dawn of the Jomon hunter-gatherers to the neon-lit skyline of modern Tokyo, the Japanese people have written one of history's most extraordinary stories. They have endured civil wars that tore their nation apart, isolation that froze them in amber, and the atomic fire that threatened to erase their future. Yet Japan endures. The rising sun still rises. Today, Japan stands as a thriving democracy, a technological superpower, and a cultural beacon that has given the world everything from samurai honor to anime imagination. The scars remain, the ruins of Hiroshima, the empty spaces where thriving neighborhoods once stood, the memory of a militarist past that cost millions of lives. But so does the spirit that rebuilt from the ashes of World War II to conquer global markets, the discipline that turned a feudal backwater into the envy of the industrial world, and the creativity that continues to inspire billions across every continent. The story of Japan is not merely a national chronicle, it is a lesson for all people who face adversity, that no disaster is final, that no defeat is permanent, that reinvention is always possible. The Japanese proved it. May the world never forget. This has been the history of Japan. Since you are still here, perhaps you would like to check my other videos. The last video was about the history of Spain. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Until next time,